Good morning to my viewers and listeners. Welcome to the next episode of Slaves to the Algo, or How to Stay Relevant in the Age of AI. My name is Suresh Shankar. I'm the founder and CEO of Crayon Data. In this episode, we take a sharp move rightward from the left brain to the right brain. I'm delighted to have with me Tim Kobe, founder and CEO of 8 Inc., a global design firm. Tim has many achievements to his credit, and I won't dwell too much on them, except to say that he was part of the team that designed the first Apple Store. He's worked with luminaries like Steve Jobs and global brand leaders around the world. And you might well be asking, what does a designer and a person who believes in customer experiences have to do with data and AI? We'll find out session of Slaves to the Algo. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Thank you, Suresh. It's great to be here.
And Tim, how would you describe yourself? I mean, I know that we work together in some things, but you're a multidisciplinary man. I mean, are you a left brain man, a right brain man? How do you introduce yourself?
Well, I don't typically do it by a side of the brain, I guess, to begin with. I hopefully try to engage the entire brain. But our background and history has come from more of the creative service industry. So most people would associate that with right brain type of activity. Our focus has been trying to understand human beings very well and be able to translate the types of things that matter to people into valuable experiences. And so I've had an industrial design, experienced design firm now for 30 years. We started in San Francisco. I was born there and live now in Singapore. So pleasure.
That's great to know. And, it's funny when you say we use the whole brain because, most of us should, and we don't. It should be a no-brainer that we use both the right and the left brain. But how do you feel like, before I kick off, how do you feel like everything? I mean, you're a person who, as I said, is into crafting experiences. You're a designer. And yet you also mentioned an interesting thing that you try to understand a human mind and a human behavior. That itself is a form of insight in using data, right? So how do you actually develop that? Is it all intuition, or have you trained yourself to understand human behavior very differently?
Well, I think we try to take any of the sources who contribute to a better understanding of human behavior, and we take a continuous learning sort of approach to that. As algorithms and feedback and analytics have come into the forefront, in recent years, that's additional information. But we have a great amount of information from psychologists. The types of the old way, I guess, of looking at things through psychographics and demographics has evolved into a much richer palette of information. And a big part of it is sorting through the information and getting to the essence of, as you were talking about earlier, about how do you remain relevant and connected to people.
So, Tim, could you share with me perhaps a couple of examples that you're seeing in your own life, either as a consumer or in your work life, where you've seen some really great use of algorithms and data to, either enrich or endanger the way we live?
I think in a way, much of the progression of the development of this technology has followed a relatively predictable path, and that being one of linear progression. I think it's much more evolutionary than revolutionary, at least at the stage we're at today. I think you do find maybe a few examples where people are trying to look at it a little bit differently than just a technical capability. And so I think there are companies who focus on creating value, in which case I think that's probably more revolutionary in the approach. And I think there are those who are looking to extract value, and those I think are less revolutionary. I think it was Tim Cook back in 2015 was somewhat critical of Google and Facebook, and not surprisingly, I suppose. But he was critical of them essentially for greed-driven data mining. In other words, trying to know as much as you possibly can and monetize it. And I think that that's a pretty sort of close in evolutionary, predictable way of thinking about it. But when you start to think about the impact that it can have on people in terms of creating more positive human outcomes, I think it changes the design framework. And so I think that kind of criticism is actually fair. And I think it means that we just need to continue to evolve the conversation so that what we ultimately end up creating are the best things for the most people.
And that's fascinating. And I'm going to kind of, since you picked up Tim Cook, and I know you worked with Steve closely. I know you designed the first set of Apple stores, and you worked with Tim after that. So when you look back at somebody like Steve Jobs, who famously once said, and I don't know whether he said it, but that's what everybody says, that customers don't know what is possible. And he had this great thing about design and being innovative and revolutionary. How was his approach to data when you were working with him? How did you guys look at data and insights? And I mean, the word algorithm is overused, but how did you look at data and insights at all? And did he use that to inform the way he developed his, revolutionary ideas?
Well, I mean, when we started working with him, Apple was a much different company. There were probably 200 employees. It was in 1997, 98 when he first came back to the company. We worked with him every week for the next 12 years, with the exception of maybe holidays and sick days. But the approach that Steve had, I think, was fundamentally counter to what the majority of the tech industry has had. And I think people both loved him and hated him for that reason. And that was that he wanted technology to be the most accessible to the most people. That it was ultimately about what did anything they create, whether it was the iPod to the iPhone to the Mac, whatever it was, how did it enable the most people to have the power of that technology in their hands? And he didn't believe that it should be kept sort of separate from the general population to be used by a few. He believed it should be extended, to the masses. And I think that that's again, both a positive and a negative. But the people who loved him, they loved him for that reason. And I think that it fundamentally comes down to what did whatever he was creating do for people. It had to have positive human outcome. And even to the extent that you could say the creation of the iPhone at the time, he thought he was creating phenomenal positive human outcomes. We've come to see today that there are also negative outcomes that have happened with the evolution. And certainly, the data feedback, exploitation, those things are potential negatives. The positives are phenomenal service, phenomenal capability. Everyone has, there used to be a cause for everyone to have a laptop. Well, everyone has more than a laptop in their hand today with mobile devices. So, I think that all of this is part of a continuing kind of, conversation that we're having between people and technology. And it's important for us to think about that relationship with the right objectives. If it's just financial, you're probably not going to end up doing much work in terms of importance or real value creation. I think that it's really an opportunity for companies to not mistake the technical capability for creating value. It has to be informed and a function of human outcomes for it to be important.
So just staying with that thought for a moment, like you said, you were in the room with him for literally a decade plus. So, I'm just trying to get into this whole thing of understanding consumers and making products that are accessible to everybody. Did he rely on over research and polling and insights, or were you operating on gut feel, or was it, like you said, you use both sides? Is it a combination of both? How did those decisions happen? Far too often we see in big companies that it's all about the data and what you're doing. So how did that magic happen in that room? Was that data at all present there?
There was absolutely. And he was interested in finding as much influence about the decisions they were making to improve their product. Scott Galloway talks about the new algorithm of value being a function of the number of receptors that a company has and the amount of information intelligence that they can derive from it. it's what you do with that. He was certainly interested in having that information, but I think one of the things that maybe made him different was he was extraordinarily ambidextrous, if you can say that, in terms of the way he thought. One of the reasons people found it difficult, I think, to work with him was somebody who was really good at analytical, thinking could come in and here's a logic tree, and we're going to follow this logic, and look, it's perfect. If it was wrong, he would see that bust in a second and send them away. But if it was perfect, then he would turn to the other side and go, but it just doesn't feel right. And how does somebody who's a master at logic deal with feedback that says it doesn't feel right, and vice versa, right? So most people have a strength of one or the other side of the brain. And I think he was just basically very strong on both sides and could easily flip between them. And if it worked on both sides, it typically would work. And so, I think he was running through an assessment, his own internal kind of assessment with that in mind. And the part that maybe, would be more the right brain is, how did it make people feel? Did it really satisfy human needs at the same time as technical criteria? And I think that his ability to work with both of those were fundamental.
And that's very interesting, because what you're saying is there's a lot of data that can inform you at a, almost, if you will, I'm trying to parse this at a feature level. This is the right thing to do. This is what people are going. But there's a higher level of data. It's almost like a metaphysical plane, when you're talking about how something, the outcome of that makes you feel. So it's like a higher order attribute that you're seeking. So it must have been quite magical. But, again, just staying on Apple, I don't want to make this about Apple, but you've been a Apple veteran in terms of design for a while. It's now a company with Tim, who's, again, an extraordinary stood for, but it's become a very efficient company. Everything just works. So is that becoming more, are they kind of now led more by data? I know he's taken some stands on privacy, on other causes, but is it becoming more a company that's about data and it's about, logical thinking in your experience?
Well, I think Steve's Apple and Tim's Apple are two different companies, and Tim, rightly so, is steering it in the direction that he believes is the most ideal for an extension of this brand. I don't think it's data versus no data. I don't really see it in that sense. I think it's, are we focusing on the human outcomes in a positive way? And if so, then what are the tools to achieve that? So I think it's somewhat of a false polarity that you shouldn't have. You should either have or not have data-driven insights. I think what he's doing is moving the company as much into services as he is into hardware, and that Apple has always had that relationship between hardware and software. And so to me, it feels like a very natural extension of the core brand values. And I think then it comes down to what are the things that you're doing that reinforce that. And I think you can look at other companies as well. Look at the evolution of Netflix and how it's helped change its experience with their customers. I think Apple could have been doing what Netflix is doing today, but Netflix was able to come in and I think have a very successful application of the new algorithm of value.
True. I don't want to make this all about Apple. I know that your accomplishments and some of the stuff that you go way beyond what you've done with Apple. So
sure.
I'm just shifting a little bit. You've written this book. You've kind of got this movement called the return experience. And that's quite a fascinating thing because, again, it's not purely a right-brained ideas, creativity-led thing. It's all about, I think, how do you create compelling customer experiences that make people feel differently. Could you tell us perhaps, again, how are you using data and how are you actually deriving these insights to understand human beings today? And how are you doing that differently from, let's say, when you started your career 2 or 3 decades ago, in terms of the way you're understanding human insights and creating experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think the feedback systems have gotten far more sophisticated over the years. Obviously, we used to build a mock-up of a space and bring people through, and then do a sort of informal survey. And if that works, okay, we'll try it, and then we roll it out and get it in the field. But I think that today there's all sorts of testing work we've done with Lincoln in China. The testing was basically every time we had a new proposition, it was focus groups looked at it. We got feedback from different segments, et cetera. We're doing work with one of the biggest banks in Thailand. We have been doing research regularly with consumer segments to ensure that the focus is going to be something that's not just an incremental change, but a dramatic but positive change. So the methodologies in those applications still include formal surveys, but on top of that, now we're getting information that comes through behavior of ongoing activities. So work we're doing with Xiaomi in China, for example, they have a 50 million person group called Mi fans, and the Xiaomi fans, when they put out a new product, Xiaomi will introduce it to their fan base, and the fans basically they critique it. They're doing all of this online on their mobile device, what have you, and they'll critique it. So Xiaomi knows before they ever spend a penny on the tooling whether this product is going to be a success or not. It's an extraordinarily powerful thing. And what we've helped them develop is a system that's used through their retail, where you look all the information you get when you're browsing a product completely through the transaction and payment is done on your mobile device. So we don't need cash wraps anymore. We don't need any of these things. But what happens is, Xiaomi probably gets 100 times more insights through tracking the behavior of what people look at and buy, what they look at and they don't buy, where they fall out of that user flow in terms of, was it price, color, availability, etc. But it gives their customers basically a breadth of capability. It allows them to see, the space may only hold 200 products, but they make 2,000 products. So it gives them the ability to sell 2,000 products now out of a what was still traditional retail space, but it's because it's become this virtual platform.
That's fantastic. So you're saying they have a 15 million base of Mi fans, and they can literally launch any new product to a small segment, test it out, and keep iterating till they put it out into the mass market. Is that how they're doing this?
Yeah, basically the Mi fans, they love the brand. They've signed up. They want to know the latest things. They get to see stuff that's, maybe it's in model form, maybe it's in sketch form. They get to see interesting things that the company's thinking about and contribute to it. They get to give feedback. They can say they love it or don't like it, but the majority of them give much more information than that. And so they're able to extract feedback, suggestions. I love it, except it should have this feature, and then they go back and work and develop the design and include that new feature if it makes sense. And I think it's become it sort of has this interesting quality, a bit like when you're launching a new product where you get people who buy into it, believe that it has value and purpose, and then can grow and develop it from there. But they become participants in the company in a way that they have a certain degree of ownership, a certain degree of connectivity to the brand that is beyond transactional kind of value.
And this is a fantastic, we talked about how design and data don't need to collide, they can collaborate. And this seems to be a fantastic expression of that. Why do you think more companies are not doing something like this? Lots of companies have 20, 30, 40 million customers. I'm fascinated. I mean, do you work with anybody else who uses this approach?
Nobody who has that sort of scale. I think that the ones that we're working with, certainly would love to have that sort of scale in terms of a feedback loop. But as we've seen a much more rapid, transition into digital space, a year and a half ago, we were still convincing people that the retail singularity was real, that physical and digital were one channel. Everyone was sort of scratching their head a year and a half ago. Today, it's already understood. And the notion that there's a digital channel and a physical channel is pretty much over. It's all one. And I think, the COVID transition being so extreme and so rapid, virtually every client that we're talking to has exceeded their numbers on the digital side. And that means that the participation and the understanding and the feedback systems that they're getting, through that channel is becoming a much greater part of the entire feedback system that they're getting. It used to be retailers would have, cameras, et cetera. Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing. You're talking about physical and digital kind of coming together. And
yeah.
I think there's a lot of research that shows that consumers today follow a random walk. No longer is it the old funnel where I found something, I found out more details, I went to the shop, I bought it, and I experienced it. It's a pretty random walk now between all of this. But something interesting happened this week, right? I mean, we're both in Singapore. Robinson's iconic store in Singapore has announced that it's going to shut down and cannot function. And something interesting is happening in China and Hong Kong, where Ant Financials had literally the largest IPO of all time. And is this
Correct.
kind of, I know you're saying the two worlds are coming together, but is this story over? Is the physical guys lost out to the digital guys? And maybe the digital guys like Amazon launching its own store going to go physical? What do you think is going to play out in the next few years? Has digital won the battle completely?
Well, I think what's happened is the conversation was, the notion that there were these two different channels was a product of the evolutionary thinking. And that evolutionary thinking, which is what I'm worried about, even with AI, for example, that evolutionary thinking means that you're going to polarize it and it's going to become this or this. And the answer is neither one of the pure players are going to be successful ultimately. The ones who are going to capitalize the most on it are the ones who recognize the value that physical interactions and virtual interactions can play and make the most of that. And so I think this is why, Robinson's going down. They stood by their pure play position of a physical retail space and rode it into the ground. It's not surprising there's going to be winners and losers. There's going to be companies who refuse to adapt. Those have historically been the species that have become extinct in the world, and that will continue in business as well. So I think anybody who doesn't embrace both is in big trouble.
And that's a really fascinating take, Tim. I kind of deliberately set this conversation up by asking you, are you a left brain or right brain person? Because I know you're not. I know you're both. And every time somebody asks me, you talk return on experience, I talk about return on data all the time, and I also keep telling, but I'm actually more of a human design thinker than I am a data person. But I'm just staying with that thought of adapting, and the whole thing about the age of relevance really is that I keep saying it's about the people that stay relevant that are going to succeed. So this new creature, this hybrid creature, who sees both data and experience, both left and right brain, both physical and digital as one thing. You're arguing that this is not evolutionary, this is revolutionary. Is there any example of somebody who you think is out there in terms of that revolution? Anything that you come across in your life, either from your clients or your experiences with the cutting edge of that revolution?
Well, like I said, I think that Xiaomi is doing a really interesting job of bringing that point of view together. I think there are companies. We're working with one of the major healthcare providers in the world right now, and we're really interested in that integration because particularly in healthcare, there's an important part of that human to human interaction, and there's an important part where the information, communications, and things can happen in a virtual space. And the insights that are derived from both are going to be stronger than one or the other. So I think it's it's a plus versus a division between one or the other. And I think that kind of polarity is natural, the way we tend to frame and analyze things. But I think it's time to have to challenge the paradigm and to think about it differently. And the notion that those things coming together are far more powerful than either one by themselves is truly valid.
So, Tim, continuing on to this vein, we talked about the fact that there is an and it's a multiplier, and you talked about the fact that there is a polarization, if you will, in the way we frame the question. You work with a lot of clients. I work with a lot of clients. I find it difficult sometimes to go and talk to the analytical people inside and tell them there's a experiential side of this that you need to consider. And you had literally the reverse experience. So what is it that is stopping people in companies from fusing these things together? Is it org design? Is it mindset? What's your experience in this? And what should they do differently?
Yeah, I think our experience is that it's been primarily mindset, and we use something we call a value creation engine, and what it does is it of all of the different points of conversations that we have with a client, we tend to put them into these three buckets, and the top one is what is the human outcome? What are we trying to achieve? If you can clearly identify a human outcome, the ability for you to create value becomes much, much higher. From that definition of what the outcomes are that you're creating, you then need to have a strategy that delivers on those outcomes. You can have strategy and no relationship to the outcomes, and they both can be fine. The problem is it won't work. And so with the strategy, it has to be aligned to deliver on the human outcomes. And then below that are the tactics. And 9 times out of 10, the client will come to us with a tactical solution, a tactical challenge, problem, etc. And the tactics have to support the strategy. The strategy has to support the human outcomes. And if we get all those pieces in the right place, most of the time you don't know if the tactic is going to be successful or not, because it doesn't align vertically with ultimately value creation. So you can have a fantastic tactic. The problem is it's irrelevant to your business. And that happens quite frequently. And in a way, it's a lot of people throwing darts in the dark. You unless you can put things into the proper relationship to one another, it's going to be very difficult to build successful businesses to create value.
And that's very interesting when you say a lot of people throwing darts in the dark, because occasionally they hit bullseye and then they think that they're genius. So
exactly.
Happens quite a bit. But I'm kind of going to just delve a little bit deeper into this topic about are you seeing any breed of new people emerge who are able to actually successfully bring these two sets together, two types of thinking together in the companies that you deal with? And if so, are those people coming from any specific type of background? I mean, are the people coming from digital more attuned to it? Are the people coming from the older, the younger? Are you seeing any patterns about the people who are doing this very well?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at many of the successful startups historically, and you might expect me to say this coming from a design background, but I think the people who have design understanding, insights, experience with that have some natural competitive advantages. And first of all, looking at the human outcome part, having empathy for the user, recognizing not just where you're solving problems, but where you can create brand new conditions. It's been helpful to break that kind of linear thinking. And the example that I see is, I sit on school boards and for design schools and advise, with the government in Singapore and others. And, what we're seeing is many of the people who come from design schools are finding their way into business, not as a designer, but as somebody who can contribute to the conversation, and in many cases at the C level. And I think that's ultimately good news, because in the end, the more companies who take into consideration the human outcomes, our impact on the environment, the kinds of things that are bigger, complex problems, the more those are taken into account when you're developing a new solution, in the end, we're going to have companies that have a more positive impact than negative. And there's no question we need companies who have the ability to have more positive impact today than we have.
So I'm not surprised at all, Tim. Not about your taking that stance, but everybody thinks that design is some flash of genius and inspiration. And I keep telling people design is an extremely logical. You've got to you got to have that big idea, but then you got to kind of think through it very logically. And so this is such a fascinating conversation. But I'm going to refer to another guest that I had on the show, Tim, and this is a gentleman who heads marketplace and platform for Expedia. He's an AI expert, and I was talking to him about data and AI, and his name is John Kim. And John actually said something very interesting. He says in the next 5 years, he says brands and trust in brands is going to be the big differentiator, not how you use data or algorithms. And I'm paraphrasing him a little bit out here. But I found that fascinating because, here is a person who's basically building a platform that wants to understand everything about travel and how you travel. And he's saying it's going to be the brand and the trust in the brand that's going to be the difference. And I know that very much aligns the way you think. But do you really think, in a world where advertising today is not driven by big ideas, but by, what happens in the Google algorithm and the bidding? And, now people are talking about brands, becoming a differentiator. What's your take on this? How important are brands going to be in this world when it seems that data is driving all decisions?
Yeah, Steve Jobs said that brands are about one thing, and that's trust. I think that you're going to start to find that trust, because there are many sort of issues around what we can or can't believe, the trust is going to start to become more and more a differentiator. And I think it's going to rise in the conversation. And this may be to his point that, the brands are going to be able to be the most successful are the ones who can communicate their values, communicate what they believe in, and then actually do that. And the ones who don't do it will be dropped. And the ones, who say one thing and don't, do the other, they'll have a problem. I think it's this issue of you're gonna be judged by your integrity, and as you should be. And the things that you say you're going to do, you do your best to deliver on. What's really interesting about that, the statistics show you're going to have much higher engagement if you're a trustworthy brand. Something like 6 times more opportunities for purchase to engage with your brand. You're going to create much higher advocacy. I think it's 12x on people becoming an advocate for your brand. And the interesting thing is 5 times more likely to forgive a mistake when you make one. And I think that for a brand is incredibly powerful. You're going to have this innate ability to compete better among your peers if you're clear about what you stand for and you honestly deliver what you say you're going to do. And I just think it sounds kind of basic, but it's actually in a world full of noise and fake news and all of the drama. People are just going to naturally select to things they can believe in and trust, and the other ones they just won't have time for. There's just not enough time for.
No, I can well understand that. In fact, to share a relatable thing, there's research that shows that, and I guess this is because Apple has been an advocate for privacy and for data, not using your data to sell you things. That Apple Health is a place where people are far more willing to trust health records and health data than some of the other big digital brands, including people like Google, right? Because there's a feeling that my data is getting misused and my data is safe here. And when it comes to health, I want my data to be absolutely safe and not being used in any way. So I think it's probably true that this whole thing of data and brands is going to be completely. The data conversation and the brand conversation are not going to be two different conversations. How a brand handles my data is increasingly becoming a very, very important part of my relationship with the brand in the digital world. If they're not going to keep my data safe, it's like a bank not keeping my money safe. And
Yeah.
so I actually think that, a lot of the conversations that we've been having, other guests also talks about data as an emotional asset. But Tim, again, I'm going to come back and ask you a couple of things. As you look at the next 3 or 4 years, and you've had a pretty long career of seeing how these trends evolve, what do you think is going to be the 2 or 3 big changes that happen because there is more data, there is more use of AI and algorithms over the next 4 or 5 years? What do you think are the fundamental changes that are going to happen as a result of that?
Well, I guess, one of the things is I think we are, really in our infancy. Andrew Ng at Stanford talks about AI being somewhat like the next electricity. If you took everything that was created when we discovered electricity and commercialized it, and you take everything that was developed in the next 10 years, some of those things, the light bulb maybe is still around, not even in the same form that it was certainly at that time. But we're really at a very, very early stage. And if we're thinking of AI as the next electricity, much of the things that will ultimately, I think, have the biggest impact on our life haven't even been invented yet. I think that this is where, as we move through things in a linear progression, we tend to go along a path that's based on the past. And this is, what Steve was talking about, consumers can't see the future. A lot of times you have to completely shift the way you're thinking to a completely new direction in order to create something that has impact and meaning. And I think that's what you're going to see. Is you're going to see some pretty radical changes as opposed to it being a functional capability with the technology. I think you're going to have to start looking at what are things that are going to really drive progress, and somebody is going to ask the right question, and then apply some of that technology in a completely new way. To me, there's always been this discussion about the rise of the machine, right? This whole notion that we should be fearing artificial intelligence. What I fear is the people who have access to that intelligence. That if it's not something that everyone has access to, it's potentially extremely dangerous. And so the idea of whether it's machine versus human or what have you, I think that's a distraction. And the reality is that it has to become something to which we all have a voice and control over what we own, what our lives are being commercialized for, and have some role in that. And so I think there's potentially new economic models. There's potentially new ways of thinking about how the data, how the insights are derived, but how they're commercialized as well. If a handful of the most successful financially companies in the world have control to all the data, is that going to be the best thing for mankind? I don't know, but I wouldn't be worried about the robot as much as I'd be worried about the other men.
And that's a wonderful way of putting it, because ultimately there's a human being behind the machine, at least at this stage. Okay. And then there may be a machine behind the human being who controls the machine. I'm just going to end on this one thing. Is there a way you think that the creative genius, when I'm just using that word in a broad sense, and I know it's a misused word, but somebody who has this, like you said, this human outcome, this doesn't make people feel right, somebody who get that thing, something that we've called, intuition. Do you think that do you see in maybe 5 years, 10 years that can ever become an algorithm? Are you going to see a Tim Kobe-like brain by the side in a machine? Is the question in some ways.
Yeah, no, I understand. I think, this question, is an interesting one. I was involved in some of the Web Summit and Rise conferences where they pitted me against an algorithm to design things, and the people who had the design algorithms in each case chose to not do it, to not demonstrate it, and And I think that part of it is that the technology is certainly not there, but fundamentally, somebody said, you can teach a robot to replace the hand, right? You can have the robot replace the hand to do the movements that you need, but you can't have it replace the touch yet. And the touch is more of closing that feedback loop. So, I think that what we have between our ears is a remarkably complex, amazing thing. I think we're really at the tip of the exploration around AI and technology. Will it replace creative thinking? It's hard, I guess, to imagine a machine connecting to my personal memories. If I'm creating something today, it might be a combination of something that I thought about when I was 12 years old playing with my brothers in the mountains, or something that I learned in college combined with some other experience, right? It's how do you put together those things which are completely nonlinear associations, and combine that with skill, combine that with intuition. I think there's a lot of challenges before we get to the point where AI can really replace the brain to do simple functions, and to do analytical thought is probably because we've seen the most growth in that area. That's the most natural extension. But I think the idea of getting a computer to redraw the Mona Lisa is not difficult. Getting it to create the next piece of art that changes society is pretty tough for a computer.
So I provocatively titled this podcast series "Slaves to the Algo." So you think we're nowhere near close to that age when we are becoming slaves to AI, and we're still masters, and will continue to be for some time. Would that be right?
Yeah. I think if you're going in the slave master route, I guess that's fair to say. Yeah.
Tim, thank you so much for your wonderful insights. Like I said right at the beginning of my podcast, I think one of the things about AI and data is that we all assume that it's a very analytical, left brain, technology-led thing, and it's great to talk to people like you who are trying to fuse these elements. Bring data into design, if you will, not treat them as separate, not treat the physical and digital world as separate. Lots of learnings out there for our listeners. Thank you very much for being on the show. And thank you to my listeners and viewers for listening to this episode of Slaves to the Algo. We had Tim Kobe, founder and CEO of 8 Inc., explaining why he thinks it is going to be a combination of the right and the left brain that is going to create the revolution. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
We have new episodes coming out every week, sometimes twice a week. Each will seek to bring a different and fresh perspective to the topic. Please subscribe to the podcast channel and share it widely in your network. I look forward to speaking to you in the next episode. Meanwhile, stay safe personally in the age of COVID and stay relevant professionally in the age of AI.